Hello and welcome to EtCetera. I'm Dave McLaughlin. Joe Felber is a Swiss-Australian multimedia artist. His latest installation is inspired by the work of American art theorist and painter Ad Reinhardt. In particular, Reinhardt's famous 25 lines of words on art statement, published in 1958. This project is a collaboration between Joe, composer Elliot Geiger, and dancer-choreographer Lucy Guerin. It features 7 stainless steel tubes through which the voices of the choral compositions created by Elliot are played, along with a series of suspended light bulbs that operate as metronomes. Projected onto the floor of the exhibition space are also videos of the animated text and photographic elements of the work, and also Lucy's dance. In addition to this, Lucy does some live performances with the exhibition. I spoke to Joe and then to Lucy outside the Australian Centre for Contemporary Art when the exhibition was on display here in Melbourne.
Well, Ad Reinhardt was a painter and a theorist, and his book Art as Art is based on his theory, and it relates very much to the black paintings, and his practice towards the end of his life was on the negation of art, and the negation of art is based on, in this particular case, on 25 lines of words on art statement. Those 25 lines have a quirky explanation of it says something and it says nothing. But however, he says so much, or says so little, and in that sense he says so much. For instance, art is art. Art as art, everything else is everything else. Or brushwork, brushes are brushwork. And that particular sentence, brushwork, brushes are brushwork, relates again to his practice as a black paintings, which is the where he put layers and layers of color onto the canvas, and it ended up to be a lustrous black or a bluish black, or it's never quite black because the blackness transcends some kind of space. And by taking everything away, he put so much back into it. And my approach to his work was like looking from a positive side, from the negation, looking back into a positive aspect. Firstly, I was so much struck by those 25 lines of words on art statements, and I did it on the computer software. I decomposed, I destroyed the sentence in his approach about the negation. So I made vertically and horizontal decomposition of graphics, text graphics. Those became the elements for Elliot to work with. I gave those to Elliot, which he was very happy to do so, because he has worked in the past with different text pieces for choral, and he was specifically intrigued by the decomposition and the graphic visuals. However, he had a bit of difficulty to compose it because he's never worked with visuals. But I particularly think that he beautifully was able to transform the text and the destruction of the text, and so it became a new element of the sensitivity of it, to listen rather than to read or to see, and that was my real reason. Then the pendulums became almost like a new aspect of a visual oral perception, because I felt like the music itself needed to be visually extended itself by the pendulum, and the pendulum relates to the metronome, and so it becomes a physical and the visual experience to absorb the music much better.
And how's the dance integrated into that as well?
The dance came later. I was looking for somebody to elaborate, to extend it further with a dancer. So I've been introduced to Lucy, and I met her, and she was very responsive to the project, especially to the black paintings of Ad Reinhardt, and she put a lot of thoughts about the work of the blackness. And so I discussed with her that I want a formal dress, and she came up with the dress design as a transparent dress. The transparency again relates to the nature of the work, which is about the blackness of Ad Reinhardt, as well as the transparency of culture and transparencies of different practice in the arts. And that's where I really believe that the new art should go, new media art should go, that it's about transparencies, that we are looking into different practices and it transforms and has a transparency of different practices coming out of it.
How unusual is this form of multimedia art integrating dance, physical art and music?
I would relate it very much like to music theatre. However, this terminology is not very used in Australia. It's much more used in Europe, and music theatre goes back to the opera, which is like the sort of 19th century was really very strong. And so it's basically play, music and a stage, and it's not much difference to this one. And obviously here's another component, which is video, which are documented Lucy's dance, which is projected onto the floor, so the viewer can always appreciate her movements within, with her compositions or choreography to the piece. The second video really gives the text piece that I decomposed, which is done on After Effects, and also the photographic visuals, which again goes into the notion of abstraction. My ideas about photography is to destroy the photography, to not manipulate it, but to actually physically throw the camera, and it becomes a result of abstraction. I do not particularly like to use the computer aspects to change that, but I rather prefer to actually use the physicality by dropping the camera, etc.
How would you describe yourself as an artist?
I think today art has, since we have so many different medias now introduced since sort of post-war, I think that this pluralistic approach and inquiry on different medias, I see myself as a pluralist media artist, and my passion for music and dance over the years have always been a silent one, and I was able to come up with this project to utilize this to an optimum and inquiry about different practices in the arts. But I see myself more as a director and a producer in this work, and collaborated with different people.
Is this your first collaboration across different aspects of the art?
Yes, it is the first one. I did a piece in Queensland, which was 1994, which was linear reading, and I did everything myself, and it was much more smaller budget, which I did the visuals and the music, and it was like a 9-month project, and at the end I felt I needed to go further. This was only with slides, so I was able to invite a composer, I was able to invite a dancer, and to go further. But obviously this is a much bigger budget, and thanks to the Australian Arts Council and to the New Media Arts Fund to really come up with the sponsoring side of it.
Is the recognition of the diverse sort of multimedia elements of art and the things that people might, the ordinary public might say, well, that's not painting, so it's not art, or it's not sculpture, so it's not art. Is there that recognition and support in the arts community for what sort of thing you do?
I think since this Australian Arts Council has founded the New Media Arts Fund, I feel there's a group of curators and art appreciators have grown to become more perceptive to new media, which is cross practices of different cross practices of the arts. And also in Europe you see this a bit more often, and as I explained to you before, the music theatre is a strong one, and I believe that there is a large audience in Australia. Well, it's always been small. When I say large, at least a number of people who become more and more aware of this, and this, obviously the Australian Council is a great support of that and wants to continue supporting it. And I believe we're going into a very exciting time where, depending on obviously of the economic situation of the country and what can be spent on the art, but I think we're going to an exciting times in terms of the arts towards the new next towards the millennium. Yeah.
Your brochure describes you as a Australian-Swiss artist.
Yeah.
And I just Also interested how the cross collaboration between your experience in Europe and experience here.
I think that's been a vital one because I've been a nomadic artist for the last 12 years and travelled extensively and also stayed in different places in Europe and back here. And now I'm decided to settle back in Melbourne and work from Melbourne as a base. And obviously my cross-culture experiences coming from Switzerland and having a dual citizenship with Australia is a very vital one in terms not only of a citizenship but also as different experiences in culture. And Australia has been the place where I mostly created it and always brought it back to Europe or to New York where I show as well. And it's been always a pleasure for me to work from Australia and to focus into international such as Europe and America here.
What's your next project going to be?
And my next project is one with the music, which is I like to come with this the Melbourne Symphony, maybe working with Markus Stenz if he agrees with me on a German composer, and that is quite a big step towards a bigger project, but obviously things have not been finalized yet. It's in the early project stage, so. But that's the next bigger project that I like to achieve.
Lucy, can you tell me how you got involved with this exhibition?
Yes, initially I was approached by Joe Felber and he wanted a live dance element in the work and I was interested in the project, and so we had some discussions and figured out what we were going to do, and that's how it...
How did you go about that?
I worked pretty much on my own on the choreography. I talked to Joe about the idea for the project and about a little bit about Reinhardt and the black paintings, and then I interpreted it myself through the choreography. It's a collaboration with three very separate elements all coming together without a lot of discussion between the three of us beforehand. So that was an interesting aspect of the project for me, to just see how it would come together. It was a bit of a surprise for all of us, I think. Mostly the elements I was playing with my dance and my response to the Reinhardt paintings were, my costume is a transparent see-through kind of black cone, which is very structured and in a sense negates the form of the body, but because it is see-through you get that double layering of very rigid form and that fluid unpredictability of the body, which is something that I worked with. And also just the idea of minimalism is always endlessly fascinating to me, so I used some components of that. And also the white wall, I sort of went into this little story for myself of, the black shape adoring the white wall, and that was fun also.
Now, apart from the two short live performances you've given, most of your contribution is on a videotape being shown, actually projected onto the floor. What differences did you find between doing that video and performing for the live audience here today?
When I perform live with the video, I think the video has a very particular point of view. It has close-ups and particular angles and highlights particular details, facial, feet. So the audience's gaze is directed very specifically to certain elements in the dance, whereas with the live performance you're really presented with the whole space and the whole body all the time.
Did you find it difficult to create something that would integrate well with the other elements?
Yes, I did actually. It was difficult because given the nature of the installation, it's not something I've had time to rehearse with. I've had to think about it pretty conceptually and just imagine the tubes and the swinging light globes, which are quite prominent in the space and fairly difficult to negotiate from a dancer point of view. So
Yeah, that struck me. Those swinging light globes
Yeah.
seem to be quite a hazard.
yes, but I mean, I do find it really interesting. I think I would have liked a little bit more time in the space with the installation, but you know, that wasn't really possible and hasn't worked out that way. So, but that's the nature of these kinds of projects. There's always a little bit of unpredictability, and that's also what makes them interesting, I think.
Is that a challenge, working with the unpredictability?
Yes, it is. I find it a challenge. It's, you know, you think you've got something all planned, you think that you know exactly what you're doing, and then you walk into the room and there's 10 people standing where you were going to go and do your little dance. So, you know, you have to quickly think of how else, and then there's a big pole in the way, and so...
That was another aspect of the live that struck me, was a sort of randomness of the audience participate. I mean, they were standing back out against the walls, but they were in what might have been considered the dancer's space to some extent. Was that difficult to deal with?
Not so much in this second performance, but in the first performance, when there were, I think, you know, over 100 people, it was difficult. But I think it's quite interesting for other audience members to see audience in the picture as well. It's like they're included in the whole event, they are part of it. So it's not that same removed aspect that you get when you're sitting in a theatre.
Welcome back to EtCetera. As part of his Ad Reinhardt project, Joe Felber has also produced a companion video to the exhibition, encapsulating all the elements of the work. Here now, in its entirety, is that video.
continue. Tonakata, continue. Honica tipit, tonicata, gonna tinny up. Cat of the photo, honica tipit, cat of the photo, honica tipit, tonacata, gonna tinny up. Cat of the. That is way bit on a cat of the photo, honica. That is way bit on a cat of the photo, honica tipit, on a cat of the gonna tinny up. That is way bit on a cat of the photo, honica tipit, on a cat of the. That is a way bit on. Dolo sepet on a cat, that is way bit on a cat of the photo. Dolo sepet on a cat, that is way bit on a cat of the photo, honica tipit, on a cat.
That was Joe Felber's companion video to his Ad Reinhardt project. And that's the end of our program for today. Goodbye.